They think it's a maximum security prison, a place where only the worst of the worst go to rot. But they have no idea what lies beneath. I know, and I'm the one who feeds it. Being a prison warden has its perks: a good paycheck, a cozy house, even a little power over the miserable bastards that end up locked away in here. For most, the job is simple: manage the staff, keep the inmates from tearing each other apart, and look tough while doing it. But my job? It's a little different. I have an arrangement, and it's the kind of deal you don't talk about unless you want to disappear permanently. You see, this isn't just any prison. There's another facility deep below ours. It's been off the books for decades, and the people inside, well, let's just say they aren't people at all. Creatures, monsters, call them whatever the fuck you want. All I know is that they're dangerous, deadly, and hungry. I didn't ask questions when I first got the job. The previous warden simply said, "Every now and then, we gotta make sure the other prisoners are fed." Just the worst of them. At the time, I thought he was just talking about death row. But I was wrong. Very fucking wrong. My first feeding happened about a year in. There was a guy named Rourke, real piece of shit, convicted of mutilating a whole family and leaving them for dead, no remorse. The kind of scumbag you don't mind seeing fry in the chair. But instead of getting the needle, I got a call late one night.
"We've got a live one. They need something now."
The voice on the other end said. I didn't even have to ask. I knew who they were. Rourke didn't know it yet, but he wasn't getting out of this alive. He was transferred down to what the staff called the basement, although no one knew what really happened down there. Not even the guards were allowed in. They just brought the inmates down and left. My job was to give the order. I'd like to say it was hard at first, but when you're dealing with filth like him, it's pretty fucking easy. I remember Rourke's face as he was being escorted, cocky as ever, thinking he'd get out on some technicality. I almost felt bad for the asshole.
"Where the hell we going, Warden?"
he sneered, as we descended deeper into the belly of the prison. "You'll see soon enough, Rourke," I replied, not bothering to hide the smirk. When we finally reached the thick steel door at the end of the hall, the guards gave me a look. They knew what was next. I swiped my keycard and the door slid open with a deep mechanical groan. It was pitch black inside, and the smell hit me immediately. Thick, metallic, like copper and rotting meat. Rourke recoiled, finally showing the first sign of fear.
"What the fuck is this?"
he spat, pulling against the guards. "Dinner time," I muttered, shoving him forward. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the lights flickered on. The room was huge, lined with reinforced glass on all sides. Even with the glass, there were steel bars set at even intervals, like a giant caged holding tank. And inside that tank, creatures, dozens of them. Some were hulking masses of muscle and teeth, others more human-looking but twisted, their eyes hollow and glowing. They stared at us from behind the glass, their bodies contorting in ways that made my stomach churn. One of them, bigger than the rest, pressed its face against the glass, sniffing the air like a dog scenting fresh meat.
"Oh shit, oh fuck, what the fuck is this place?"
Rourke stumbled back. He was finally realizing this wasn't a normal transfer. I watched with cold detachment as the guards cuffed him to the feeding chair, a metal throne bolted to the floor, with chains that locked over his arms and legs. No escape. I stepped back, pressing the button that sealed the room. The last thing Rourke saw was me giving a half-hearted wave before the glass slid down and the creatures were unleashed. The sound of them tearing him apart still haunts me, not because I cared about him, but because of how fast it was. They were ravenous, and the feeding frenzy was brutal, bones cracking, flesh ripping, and Rourke's screams. They were cut off almost instantly. He didn't last long. None of them ever do. It didn't take long for the process to become routine. Every few weeks I'd get a name, someone who'd done something so horrific that no one would miss them. We'd bring them down, strap them in, and let the creatures have their fill. I used to think I was doing the world a favor getting rid of the scum, people who deserved to die in the worst way. But then I started thinking, am I any better? I mean, sure, I wasn't the one eating them, but I was still feeding the beasts, still complicit. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me liked it. Liked the power, the control. Liked knowing that when I gave the order, their fate was sealed. There was no escape. But the worst part? The creatures are evolving. About 6 months ago, something changed. The creatures weren't just feeding anymore. They were watching us, studying us. And one of them, the biggest one, the leader, I swear it started smiling, like it knew something we didn't. A few days ago, I got a call from the higher-ups. They told me there was a new request from the creatures. What kind of request? I asked, dreading the answer.
They want more. Bigger, stronger prisoners.
I hung up, my heart racing. They're not just feeding, they're preparing. For what? I don't know. But I've seen enough to know it's not good. I'm trapped. I've made my deal, and now I'm stuck feeding these monsters. But part of me wonders, what happens when the prisoners run out? Who's next on the menu? I think I already know the answer. After that call from the higher-ups, I should have known things were about to get worse. They told me to start selecting prisoners who were tougher, more violent, bigger prey for the creatures. I didn't argue. I was too far in to back out now. What was I going to do? Go to the cops? Call a press conference and tell the world that under my prison there's a hellhole full of creatures that eat human beings? No one would believe me. But this last batch, it didn't go like the others. It was about a week ago. We had 3 guys on the list, all violent offenders. One of them was Dawson, a former gang enforcer. Huge, tatted up, muscles for days. The kind of guy who could take on a bull and probably win. The other 2 were lower-level scum, but bad enough to fit the bill. We brought them all down to the basement. Same procedure as always, but this time the creatures were different. They were waiting for us when we opened the door, not lurking in the shadows, not hiding behind the glass. They were up front, pressed against the barrier like they knew exactly what was coming.
Fuck this, where the hell are we?
The other 2 were quieter, but you could see the fear in their eyes. They'd heard the stories. Rumors spread fast inside, especially about the basement. No one knew the truth, but they all knew if you went down there, you weren't coming back.
Shut up and sit down.
One of the guards growled, shoving Dawson into the chair. But something was off. The creatures weren't snarling, weren't salivating like they usually did before a feeding. They were watching, silent, staring at me like they were waiting for something. I felt my stomach turn as I swiped the key card and opened the feeding chamber. The moment the glass slid down, Dawson screamed. Not in pain, but in rage. He ripped himself free of the chair before the guards could even react, lunging toward the door. But the creatures were faster. The first one tore into him like he was nothing. Its claws sunk deep into his chest, and the sound... Jesus, the sound of flesh tearing like wet paper. It's something I'll never forget. But that wasn't the worst part. Dawson didn't die right away. He fought. He screamed, cursing, punching, trying to claw his way out even as the creature gutted him. I'd seen some bad shit down here, but nothing like this. It wasn't just a feeding anymore. It was a game. They were playing with him, tearing off pieces, letting him scream, then going back for more. And the other 2? They weren't so lucky either. They didn't even make it to the chair. The moment Dawson was down, the creatures moved on them like a pack of wolves. It was chaos, blood, screams, flesh being ripped apart. By the time it was over, there was nothing left but scraps. But the creatures, they didn't stop. They just stood there, staring at me. Eyes black, mouths dripping with gore, but still, silent, waiting. I felt it then. For the first time since I started this, I felt real fear. This wasn't just about feeding anymore. They were toying with us. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel it deep in my bones. Something had changed. The next morning, I got another call from the higher-ups. They didn't ask about the feeding. They didn't even mention the prisoners. They just said one thing.
They want something else now.
My blood ran cold. Something else? I said, gripping the phone so tight I thought it'd break. What the hell does that mean? The voice on the other end didn't waver.
They're evolving. They want something better. Start preparing.
Before I could say another word, the line went dead. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. The nightmares were back. I kept seeing Dawson's face, twisted in pain, screaming as they ripped him apart. And then I'd see them, standing there, eyes black and empty, waiting, always waiting. I went through the motions at work, trying to act like everything was normal. But every time I went near the basement, I felt them. I could hear them, scratching at the walls, growling just out of sight. They knew I was there, they knew I was afraid. Then the request came in. Not a name, not a prisoner. They wanted me. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., when I heard the knock on my door. I knew it was coming. The nightmares had told me as much. But when I opened it, seeing the guard standing there with that dead look in his eyes, it was like the ground dropped out from under me.
Time to go.
He said, voice flat. "Fuck you," I spat, backing away. "I'm not going down there." But I didn't have a choice. 2 more guards appeared behind him, and before I could even think about running, they had me in cuffs, dragging me toward the basement. My heart pounded in my chest as we descended the stairs, the walls seeming to close in around me. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but deep down, I knew there wasn't one. This was always how it was going to end. When we reached the door, the guards shoved me forward. My key card hung loosely around my neck and they didn't bother taking it. They didn't need to. I swiped it, the door groaning open. Inside, the creatures were waiting. Not just lurking in the shadows this time, they were right up front. I could see them clearly now. The leader stood at the center, its black eyes locked on mine, its mouth curled into a grin. They were ready, and so was I. I didn't fight. Not because I didn't want to, but because it wouldn't have made a damn difference. Once I stepped into that basement and saw their eyes, I knew it was over. The guards left me there, didn't even bother closing the door behind them. They knew I wasn't going anywhere. I could feel the creatures watching me, their eyes burning holes into my skin. I've seen plenty of prisoners down here lose their shit when they realized what was about to happen to them. The begging, the screaming, the crying. I didn't think it would happen to me. I was wrong. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I was going to die in here. The leader, the biggest one, the one with that fucking smile, stepped forward. Its massive frame blocked out the light, casting a shadow over me. It wasn't like the others. It had more human features, but they were all wrong. Its skin was too tight, its limbs too long, and its eyes, those black, empty pits stared into my soul. It crouched down in front of me, sniffing the air like it could taste my fear.
Warden, it's time.
I could barely form words. My mouth was dry, my throat constricting as I tried to speak. Time for what? I finally managed to croak, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The creature tilted its head, the twisted grin never fading.
For you to join us.
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Join them? What the fuck did that mean? They didn't want to eat me, they wanted something worse. No, I let out, shaking my head. No fucking way. The creature's smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It leaned closer, its hot breath washing over me, smelling like rotten death.
You've been feeding us for so long, Warden. Did you really think you were exempt from the deal you made? That you were safe?
I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sign up for this, I muttered, stumbling over my words. I was just doing my job.
Your job? Yes, you were very good at it. Feeding us the worst of your kind. But now it's time for something better.
The creature mocked, standing up to its full height. It gestured to the others behind it, who were all watching silently. They moved in closer, surrounding me. I could feel their hunger, but it wasn't the same as before. This was different. They weren't just looking at me like prey, they were looking at me like an equal. I don't know what happened next. 1 minute, I was backing away, my mind racing, trying to figure out how the hell I could get out of this. The next, they were on me. All of them. Claws digging into my skin, teeth ripping into my flesh, but not to kill me. Not to devour me like they had with all the others. They were changing me. The pain was unbearable, like fire coursing through my veins. I screamed, but it didn't matter. No one could hear me down here. No one was coming to save me. My body convulsed, every muscle seizing as they tore me apart and stitched me back together in ways I can't even describe. It felt like I was being ripped from the inside out, my bones breaking, my skin splitting, but I wasn't dying. I was still alive. And that's when I realized this was the deal. This was the price for feeding them all those years. When it was over, I was lying on the cold, blood-stained floor, gasping for air. My body felt wrong, alien. My skin was stretched tight over bones that felt too long, too sharp. I could feel something shifting inside me, something dark and unnatural. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out beneath me. The creatures watched, their eyes glinting in the dim light. I wasn't one of them yet, but I was close.
You'll get used to it, the hunger, the power. It'll become who you are. It'll consume you.
The leader hissed, crouching down beside me. I don't want this, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. The creature chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl.
It doesn't matter what you want, Warden. This was always your fate. You were never just the one feeding us. You were always going to become one of us.
I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I wasn't a monster. I wasn't like them. But the pain in my body told me otherwise. For days, I stayed down there, alone in the dark. The creatures watched from the shadows, waiting. I could feel the hunger growing inside me, gnawing at my insides, demanding to be fed. I tried to fight it, but it was relentless. And then, the guards came. I heard them long before they reached the door. The heavy thud of boots on the concrete, the low murmur of voices. They had no idea what was waiting for them. No idea that I wasn't the same warden they'd left down here. I could smell them, their fear, their sweat, the sound of their blood pumping through their veins. My mouth watered, my muscles tensed. The hunger was overwhelming, blinding. When they opened the door, they didn't recognize me. How could they? I wasn't human anymore. Not entirely. I don't remember what happened next. Not clearly. All I know is that when it was over, the guards were dead, torn apart, eviscerated, and I was covered in their blood. I felt nothing. No remorse, no guilt, only satisfaction. The hunger was gone, at least for now, but it wouldn't be long before it came back. I'm not the warden anymore. I'm something else, something worse. And now I know the truth. The deal was never about feeding the creatures. It was about turning me into one of them. And soon I'll need to feed again. Days, or maybe weeks, blurred into a haze after my transformation. The hunger was my constant companion, gnawing at me like a parasite. I had lost track of time, trapped in the dark labyrinth of the basement. My humanity, what little I had left, was slipping away with each passing hour. I could feel it. The need to feed, the bloodlust. It was becoming who I was. The creatures, my brothers, watched me. They didn't speak much, but their eyes told me everything. I wasn't the first warden to make this transformation. I could see it now, the way they moved, the way they carried themselves. They weren't just mindless beasts. They were calculating, intelligent. Once they had been men, and so had I. It wasn't until I heard the heavy footsteps echoing down the stairs that the pieces started to fall into place. This time, it wasn't just guards. It was the higher-ups, the ones who had given the orders, the ones who had put me here. I could smell their fear before they even opened the door. It was sweet, intoxicating, and the hunger surged inside me again. But I stayed still, watching, waiting. When they entered, the leader of the creatures, the biggest, the one who had spoken to me before, stepped forward. His eyes met mine for a moment, then turned toward the men in suits.
It's time.
One of the higher-ups said, his voice steady but laced with tension.
The final phase.
Final phase? I growled, my voice deeper, more guttural than before. What the fuck are you talking about? The man didn't answer me. Instead, he looked at the creature leader, then back at me. It was as if I was already dead. Nothing more than a tool. The creature leader, who I now understood had once been just like me, smiled that sick, twisted smile again.
They don't tell you everything, do they, Warden?
I growled, baring my teeth. Tell me what? He stepped closer, circling me slowly like a predator toying with its prey.
You thought you were just feeding the monsters. You thought you were doing your jobs, keeping control. But this was always a test.
He gestured around us to the creatures, the blood-stained walls, the whole facility. A test? I spat, rage boiling inside me. What kind of test?
To see if you were like us. To see if when given the power to feed the beasts, you would become one. And you did.
The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. All the wardens who had come before me, the ones who had given the orders, sent prisoners to their deaths. They weren't just facilitators. They were being tested, watched. And when they complied, when they sent men and women to be torn apart, they sealed their own fates. The creatures I had been feeding weren't born monsters. They had been wardens, just like me. The higher-ups, the men in suits, they had been playing the long game. They didn't care about justice or punishment or keeping society safe. They cared about control, about shaping monsters. Every warden who took the job, everyone who complied, was simply signing their own death sentence. And now, we were all part of something bigger, something darker. Why, I asked, my voice a mixture of rage and despair. Why turn us into this? The creature leader smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it, just cold, hard truth.
Because we are the Wardens.
The higher-ups stepped forward, one of them pulling a tablet from his coat. He swiped across the screen and suddenly the walls around us began to shift. The facility, it was opening up. The prison wasn't just a place to keep monsters. It was a breeding ground, a place to create something worse. I could hear it now. The sounds of steel doors sliding open, the roar of engines starting up, the rumble of the ground beneath us. This facility wasn't just underground. It stretched far beyond that. The creatures, no, the former wardens, they were being unleashed.
You've done well. Better than most. But this is just the beginning.
One of the higher-ups said, looking directly at me. Beginning of what? I snarled, taking a step forward, my body tensing with anger. The man smiled, but it was cold, lifeless.
The world needs order. It needs a prison, Warden. And now it's time for you and the others to run it.
The realization settled over me like a thick fog. This had been the plan all along. The creatures, they were us. They had been chosen, just like I had. Condemned to become the very things we thought we were controlling. And now, with the doors open, with the facility expanding, we were no longer confined to the basement. We were going to run the world like a prison, a place where order was maintained through fear, where the strong fed on the weak, where control wasn't just about locking people away. It was about transforming them, breaking them. I felt the hunger surge inside me again, but this time I didn't fight it. I understood now. This was who I was, who I had always been. The higher-ups watched, their cold, calculating eyes tracking every movement as the creatures, my brothers, began to move. They were ready. I was ready. The world wasn't just a place anymore. It was a cage, and we were its keepers. I stepped forward, the weight of the transformation heavy on my bones, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. The leader creature, the former warden, nodded in approval as I joined him at the front. Together, we looked at the higher-ups, the men who had orchestrated all of this. What happens now? I asked, my voice deeper, more resonant, filled with the power I now understood. One of the men in suits smiled.
Now, you show them what it means to live in a world where the wardens have become the monsters. Show them how you will bring order, and how disobedience to our plans will be swiftly dealt with.
And just like that, we were unleashed. The world would never be the same. It would fall under our control, not through laws or walls, but through fear. Every person out there would become part of our prison, and we would be its rulers, its wardens, its monsters. There was no turning back. I had become what I thought I could control, and now the world was on the menu.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. I really wanted to create something where the lines between good and bad were really blurred. I think at first you could step into the warden's shoes. Yes, he was following orders. And what if the warden fed anyone to the monsters? But he wasn't. He was condemning the worst of the worst, and you probably didn't think that was so bad. Then you find out they will be unleashed to the world and would be everyone's problem. Would you have followed orders or exposed the truth? Well, until next time.